On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, going to be joined by Nick Schwerdt. We're going to go over a little bit of the KU Kentucky. Is Kansas back headed into the Kansas State game? As we'll talk about that. Finish up with some who stat lines it anyway.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. You can find me as well, Rock Chalk Sports Talk 3 to 6, Monday through Friday on KLWN in Lawrence. You can find my co-host for today's episode, Nick Schwerdt, at Nick_Schwerdt on Twitter. You can find him with Cody and Gold in the afternoons, 10 to 2 on 610 in Kansas City, Wave in the Wheat podcast with Odyssey as well. So on today's edition of the show, KU bounces back. They end their 3-game losing streak. We're going to talk a little reactions with KU Kentucky game, what it means for this team, if it's just nothing or if it means they're kind of back and they figured some things out. And then we're going to get on to some Kansas State talk. We'll finish up with a always fun segment, whose stat line is it anyway. First, this episode, though, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lawn today to get started. Okay, so Kansas takes down Kentucky. And, you know, it's funny because when Kansas loses a game to Kentucky, it's always like, well, you know, it didn't really matter. But when you win the game, you see Bill Self having like the fist pump, beating Kentucky. And obviously it means a lot for this team coming off of 3 straight losses. And I think there were a lot of things you can individually take away and go, well, Jalen again looked like a National Player of the Year candidate, or Kevin McCullough did a lot of, really good things to help you win that game. Or DeJuan Harris bounced back. KJ Adams bounced back. You saw some bench contributions from, some of the bench centers like Ernest Uday that was kind of impressive. What was your biggest overall takeaway from the Kentucky win to, possibly this team's future of where they need to go?
Well, I think I would start with my biggest questions going into the game. My biggest questions in the midst of that 3-game losing streak was, are you going to get any production from the bench, and can your guard play improve? The guard play question kind of answers itself. Unless you think that DeJuan Harris and Kevin McCullough are going to be stuck in this perpetual rut all season long, then what fixes that is time. The bench play, though, is the bigger question that I think is going to be a question all season long. Because at this point, unless Ernest Uday is coming off the bench giving you 15, 20 solid minutes a night, I expect that to be a revolving door. I still expect there to be nights where he doesn't play that much, or where Zach Clements is the first big off the bench, or where Zuby Ejiofor continues to get run, or where you just don't go to the bigs on the bench at all. And it goes back to what we've seen for much of this year, which has been a combination of Joe Yesufu and Bobby Pettiford being the only guys really giving you quality minutes off the bench. It's nice to see Ernest be that guy, because for a lot of fans, and I think I would probably even lump myself into this boat, your attention always goes to the most talented players. And a lot of times that's the freshmen, whether it's Ernest or MJ Rice. When you're not getting any solid production off the bench, when the guys like Joe and Bobby who are coming in aren't giving you quality minutes, when you're losing something going to the bench, at some point you start to just say, what about this guy who was a top 30 player in the country coming out of high school? Like, is there some untapped potential that maybe we can start to chip into this year? And that was a positive sign to see it from Ernest. You obviously have to see more, and he alone is not going to be enough to make you feel really confident about this team's depth by the time you get to the NCAA tournament, but it's a step in the right direction. I'm not willing to say it's anything more than that, though.
Yeah, I thought what was interesting is that, we've seen kind of this carousel of the first big off the bench all season long. We've seen, I think it was, the Indiana game maybe, where Zuby Ejiofor played really well. And then you're like, okay, is he going to take down the role now? And then the next game against Harvard, he was the first big off the bench. He played like 2 or 3 minutes for the full game because he didn't do a ton. We've seen Zach Clements have a good game against Oklahoma. Didn't lead to more playing time the next game. We saw Ernest Uday or Zuby have different games in the non-con against some lesser opponents earlier this year where kind of the same thing, and it didn't lead to more playing time. What feels different about this one is you are kind of getting to that point in the season where it's like, put up or shut up time. It kind of is. And also the fact that, hey, you did this against Kentucky. You did this on the road. You did it against, at your position, the guy who won National Player of the Year last season. And I know it wasn't always Ernest versus Oscar Tshiebwe, but I think that matters a little bit here. So that, I think, was a positive takeaway. But you're still not getting anything from the bench guards. So I don't know what to totally think of the bench there. But I think the biggest takeaway for me was just the bounce back of DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams. Because what's funny with DeJuan specifically, like with KJ, you could understand, you go through some ups and downs. And that's what happened in the Baylor and the game before that against TCU, where I think in the two games combined, you went 2 for 11. With DeJuan Harris, he doesn't feel like a player. Like if Grady Dick has a game where he goes 3 of 12 shooting, it's like, okay, that's going to happen some nights. DeJuan Harris doesn't seem to play a game that has a lot of highs and lows. It's usually steady. So I don't know what was going on there, but I think to me, that was the biggest takeaway of getting him in the positive track, because that's supposed to be your guy who is always steady.
Yeah, but did you have concerns about DeJuan before the game? Yeah, that's kind of where I was at, because that was one thing that was leading to Kansas's losses, was two guys that you needed to have play well for you. Your two starting guards weren't playing well. And DeJuan, who at times looked like he was lacking confidence, you had to take a step back and say, okay, is this just who he is now? A guy who helped lead you to a national championship? Is he just rattled? He's never going to get it back. The guys who have the equity, you don't worry about. Kevin's a little bit different because he wasn't on this team last year, but that also leads to, I think, some confusion as to who he is, because he wasn't playing well either. And so when you've got two guys, your two starting guards, who aren't scoring the ball, and you're losing games, all of a sudden it becomes an issue, when it wasn't an issue when KU was, the number 2 team in the country. It only became an issue when they started losing games. Anybody who watched Kevin McCullough at Texas Tech, like what you've gotten from him this year at Kansas is exactly what Texas Tech got from him for 3 years. This is who he is. He's not a good shooter. He is a streaky scorer, but he's a high IQ player. He will do a little bit of everything, and he is one of the premier defenders in the front court, or in the backcourt, that the nation has to offer. So I never really was concerned about DeJuan. The problem has been you can't afford to take either one of those guys off the court for a second, because when you were bringing Joe and Bobby in, it was a net negative. They weren't giving you anything. So what does that do? It puts even more of an emphasis on DeJuan and Kevin to play well, knowing that there are no reinforcements coming in off the bench. So I think maybe fans were maybe a little bit too hard on those guys. And I'm not saying that everybody was, throwing them under the bus, but everybody was immediately focusing their attention to those dudes, when I feel like the story was what we started talking about, the fact that there is no one to give them a breather coming in off the bench.
Yeah, and I still don't know if you really solved that in that game. We had the comments from Bill Self about Joe Yesufu at Hawk Talk, how, he was like, I think he can be the guy who scores for us off the bench. And he told Joe, as the story was relayed to us, after he got off, he like stopped him and goes, I meant what I said. Like, you can be that guy, and you need to be that guy for us. And then Joe comes in and he hesitates on a shot and misses it. And yeah, back to kind of square one there. So as far as like, is this team back? Are they back to being, I don't know, to where they were, I guess, before the 3 straight losses, or even to like where they were after the K-State loss? Cause that wasn't like a huge deal. Are they there? Like, do you view the Kansas State game on Tuesday night, do you view it any different now that they beat Kentucky as opposed to if they would have lost that game?
No, I think, well, maybe this is the same answer, but I think they are the exact team that they were before the K-State loss. It's just that they're more adequately ranked. Like, I never thought Kansas was the number 2 team in the country. They just had a really impressive resume. Now that you tack on 3 losses and an impressive road win over an SEC team, I think they're about where they're at. I think they're a fringe top 10 team with potential to crack into that elite status of the top 4, 5, 6 teams in the country if a few things change. If one of these guys off the bench, if a couple of these guys off the bench emerge and can be real contributors, right? If Grady Dick can maybe take that next step to becoming a really lethal player, to somebody who asserts himself every single night. But I don't view them any worse or better or back to normal. I feel like they've mostly been the same team. They went through a midseason rut, And I know that 3 games makes it sound worse than it is. One of them was a 1-point loss in overtime on the road against your biggest rival. And the other one was against a Baylor team that is much better than we thought they were going into that game. They're one of the hotter teams in the country. So that's why I don't really view them any differently. They lost 2, they lost 3, could have easily been 2 losses, at which point we're not really talking about this team like hitting a lull because they do this every single year. But yeah, I think they're, somewhere between the 6th and 12th best team in the country, but there's plenty of time for them to improve or sort of establish themselves as maybe being one of the teams on the outside looking in.
We're going to get to some Kansas State talk, finish up with whose stat line is it anyway. First, this episode of Locked On brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America with FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have a ton of great features that make betting on sports easy and fun. Download FanDuel now so you can bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets. And that's if your first bet doesn't win, you're basically covered in that way. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who's going to score the first touchdown. You can even bet on the Kansas State game tonight. I like to do little parlays. Let's go with Jalen Wilson to score 15 plus points. We'll go let's go KJ Adams to score 10 plus points, Grady Dick to score 10 plus points. That'll get around even odds for you. The Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/locked-on to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook of the NFL. Disclaimer in the details on the show page. Kansas State view. Kansas takes on Kansas State. Good old ESPN Plus game. 7 o'clock and 5:30 pregame on KLWN. So based on what you saw in the first meeting, obviously a very back and forth game. Either team could have easily won it. Kansas had 3 players foul out. Kind of a weird game at the end. But what would be the most worrisome thing in this matchup? Like, what is it that you saw in the first meeting that could give Kansas the most troubles? And then is there anything that you take from the first game and go, yeah, but I don't know how Kansas State stops that?
I'm going to be honest, Derek. I'm not skirting your question, but nothing. Kansas is a better team. KU is a better team than Kansas State. We can argue all day about who has the better resume. KU's a better team. There's a reason why there's 7-point favorites. Think about that for a second. K-State, one of the hottest teams in the country. They validated their early season success when they beat you at their place. That was the moment where Kansas State arrived in the national conversation this year. Tell me why Kansas is 7-point favorites in the rematch. It's because they're a better team. They're a better team. And if I just want to pull up, that was the game where DeJuan went, 1 of 7 from the field. Grady went 1 of 8 from 3. KU shot 21% from 3-point range and still almost won. That game. Kevin McCullough scored 0 points. You got absolutely nothing from your bench. How many of those things do I expect to continue? Is Grady Dick going to go 1 of 8 from 3 again? Are Kevin McCullough and DeJuan Harris they might not be great scorers, but they are high IQ, elite defensive guards. This is a top 10 backcourt in the country. They're just going to have another off night, another one. No, dude, no. There's nothing about this. This team K-State's a good team. I think they're a top 20 team in the country, top 15 team in the country. But there's nothing about the matchup that necessarily scares me because I think in a lot of ways they're very similar to Kansas in that they don't go deep off the bench. They rely upon really 2 guys to do a lot of their scoring. And unless you think that they're just going to go nuclear from 3 like TCU did a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it's a good basketball team, but there's nothing about them that scares me. And there's not a massive decided advantage that I see them having over Kansas, where I could come up with probably 2 or 3 that I think Kansas has over them.
Yeah, so everything you talked about, the kind of, I don't know, fluky might be the wrong word, but of having 3 guys foul out. And like you said, Grady Dick, 1 of 8 from 3. Desi Sills for Kansas State had 20-something points. He came in. shooting 22% or something like that from 3-point range. So you don't expect that to continue. I think the one thing that interests me in this game, when Kansas was having trouble early in the game, they were like switching everything, and they talked about this in the post game. They started changing that as the game went on, and they basically just like told, hey, DeJuan Harris, just stick on Marquise Noel. And he only scored 4 points, and that's one of the best players in the Big 12. I think coming into that game, he was shooting, insane percentages, scoring over 30 points per game in Big 12 play. That's kind of the matchup for me. Like, if Marquise Noel has single digits again, you should win this game going away. But if Marquise Noel has kind of 20-point game or something like that, and you can't really slow him down. But then again, if you have DeJuan Harris on him, why would I think other to that? But like, KJ Adams kind of dominated that game before he fouled out. So I would expect a big KJ game. I mean, why would you not expect another big Jalen game? If Kevin McCullar's out there longer, guarding Keontae Johnson a little bit more, like that helps you on both ends of the court. I think that it's interesting because there are so many avenues of why KU should win this game, and I kind of expect them to. But if they lose this game, is it too early to say they're not going to win the 12?
No. Why? And you know better than this too, and that's why I'm upset with you, is because you know better, and you've seen.
I'm just asking the questions.
But you shouldn't be asking that question. You've seen this conference be decided in the last week multiple times. You see it all the time. There were people asking it after K-State beat KU the first time. What happened? K-State went out and lost a game like a week later. I hate doing that. I hate doing that this time of year, being like, well, you got to have this one. Well, you mean they've got to win this one if they want to stay in the Big... No, they don't. No, they don't. None of these games are must win. None of them. It would be very impactful if they won this game. But to say that you're out of the Big 12 race, what would that put them? 2 games back with 8 to play? Crazy things happen. Look at this conference. Where's the separation in this conference? Where is the line? It's a serious question for you. Where do you see the line in this conference? Because I think it's after 5. I think between KU, K-State, Iowa State, TCU, Baylor, and Texas. So 6. Where is the line between those 6 teams?
There's really not. I mean, the only difference is, like, you could say, oh, this team's better with their A+ game. This team's C+ game is better than the other. Like, that's the only difference. Some teams are more consistent. Some teams have a better ceiling game. Like, I think TCU has the best A+ game in the conference, but TCU doesn't play their A+ game a lot, So it's all the same.
But so that's kind of my point, though, is because when you get to like that number of 6, and maybe you think one of those teams doesn't belong, maybe you think TCU doesn't belong, or that Iowa State doesn't belong. Well, when you get to enough of those teams, they got to start playing each other. All of these teams got to play each other, and some of them multiple times still. So they're going to, like, I think 5 losses might get you a share of the Big 12 title this year. Don't you think?
I was looking back at 2018. I didn't remember the conference being this, I guess, well distributed with wins in 2018 when they made the Final Four and lost to Villanova. That Kansas team won the conference at 13-5 by 2 games. Every team in the Big 12 except for one had 8 or more wins. Does that not sound like what is going to like happen this year? Similarly?
And the difference is, I think only 5 teams made the tournament that year, or was it 4?
I think I think it's 5 or 6.
Oh yeah. That's right. Because Texas snuck in. Yeah, you're right. This conference is going to get 6 teams in the NCAA tournament, and as of right now, like, they all look like 5 or 6 seeds. Again, they're going to suffer losses and fall down the seed line, but one team we know that's not going to happen to, like, Kansas is not going to be a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. They're going to be racking up these wins, but I really do believe that. I believe 5, maybe 6 losses will get you a share of the Big 12 title, and if that's the case, no, it's way too early to get into the must win. I know we like it because it's good conversation for shows like this, but I think we all know none of these games are must win. They're big swing games, and it certainly decreases your margin for error the rest of the way. But no, none of them are must win.
2011, Texas was 11-0. Kansas was 9-2. And that was when the Big 12 was 16 games, suppose 18. Kansas won the league by a game.
And Texas that year, they imploded down the stretch. I think they lost like 3 of 4, 4 or 5, something like that. And Texas Tech, that same year that you were talking about, 2018, I think Texas Tech lost like three, same situation, like 3 of 4 down the stretch. No, they lost. Oh my God, I'm looking at it now. They lost 4 in a row, starting on February 17th. They were 10-3 in the conference, at which point Kansas would have been 9-4, and Texas Tech lost 4 in a row, including 4 of their last 5. And KU ended up winning it by 2 games. By 2 games. A lot happens. It gets weird the end of February, man.
All right, let's finish things up. Whose stat line is it anyway? This is Locked On Jayhawks. So first up for this week, whose stat line is it anyway? I haven't been keeping a record at all of how you've been doing, but I know it's very good. You have a very good percentage. I think you've only missed like one.
Yeah, I missed one. It was the last episode we did.
All right, this one I think is gonna be a loss for, I don't know, maybe, because you have to get 3 on this first one. This is a nation of 3 players against Kentucky. 17 minutes total, 0 points, 1 assist, 1 turnover, 3 fouls. What 3 players put that together?
Okay, so 17 minutes. What was the next stat?
0 points, 1 assist, 1 turnover, 3 fouls.
Okay, so it's not Ernest because he scored. Well, one of them is Joe.
Yes.
Well, Bobby and Joe.
Yes.
I linked those 2 guys together. Okay, so those 2. Who's the third? Oh, did Zuby score? Didn't he have like an oop or something? Who's the other player who came off the bench?
You definitely know this. I'm surprised you haven't got around to this guy.
Oh, it's MJ. It's MJ Rice. So yeah, MJ. Those 3.
Yeah, just getting nothing from the bench cards.
Dude, I'm telling you, like, you don't need consistent production from all of these bench guys. You just need someone to pitch in every night. And that has been what's plagued Kansas is too many nights. They've got absolutely nothing from those bench minutes. And that was light on the minute. That was light on the minutes. Usually Joe and Bobby are playing like 12, 15 a night.
Yeah. All right. This is in Big 12 only play. I don't know if you know this, but 6th on KU, 6th on the team in points per game in Big 12 play is averaging 3 points per game. So further distinguishing the lack of bench production. There are 2 Jayhawks who are tied for 6th on the team in Big 12 scoring with 3 points per game. I'll just ask you to name one of the 2.
Okay. I believe one of the 2 would be Zach Clements.
That is correct. Zach Clements and Michael Jankovic are the 2 answers.
Hey, I'm so glad you didn't make me name 2 because I was not guessing Jake for the second one.
Do we go back to the Bill Self preseason comment about Michael Jankovic? Should he be in the rotation at this point with the lack of guard scoring going back to the first one we had?
I was at the TCU game, and when he came in at the end of the game, I turned him. We stayed for the bitter end, and I turned to my buddy. I said, Bill said he's maybe the best shooter on the team. My friend just looked at me. He's like, that's not good. Kind of like what I told you at the time. I go, whoa, really? Okay, we need to maybe peel back the layers of this onion because this is not good news.
All right, last one we got here. This is from the Kansas State game that was in Manhattan. This player had 5 points. That was 4th on the team that game. He had 3 rebounds. That also was 4th on the team that game. He had 1 assist and 1 made 3-pointer. He was just one of 4 Jayhawks to make 3 in that game. Who is it?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know this one. Oh. It's not a starter, is it?
I mean, it's not Jalen Wilson, so I'll help you eliminate that one.
I know it's not Jalen, and I know it's not KJ. And I know it's not McCullough. Did Grady only have... Grady had more than 5. Why can't I... See, this is the individual game stuff kind of gets me sometimes. One player, one game, because they kind of run together, especially when you give them to me a week and a half later.
Well, this is interesting because you can view this one of 2 ways. This is either a bad game for a starter or this is a good game for a bench player.
I know, and I'm leaning towards it being a bad game for a starter, but that doesn't make any sense. I'm gonna go DeJuan Harris.
It was Joe Yesufu.
Oh man. Damn.
So Joe gonna have another good game? I don't know.
That's a good game. We're counting that.
I mean, for the bench, yeah.
We need to up our standards a little bit around here. 5 points, 1 assist. That's not cutting it for a big game from me.
We've adjusted the line. Nick, I appreciate the time as always, man. Anything you want to plug before we let you go?
No, man, we're just we're putting out new episodes of Waving the Wheat every Wednesday. We had on Travis Goff a couple of weeks ago. We had on Jay Billis last week. So every Wednesday. So we'll be recapping KUK State here coming up in about 24 hours.
All right, that's Nick Schwerdt. I'm Derek Johnson. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll recap the KUK State game on tomorrow's show. Make sure you're subscribing wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Later.